are listening to Mama Murdered a Podcast, and I'm so excited. We're doing the second episode of Listener Stories, where you, the listener, send me your craziest stories. If you have a story that you'd like to hear featured on the podcast, just send it over to mommamurderedapodcast@gmail.com. The first story that we have comes from a listener who wishes to remain anonymous, so we'll call them Anonymous. I have 3 kids, and my daughter was the youngest, and she never really played with toys and clothes like little girls do, but she loved seeing what shoes everybody had on and always wanted to buy new shoes. She kept her shoes in her room, and she would spend hours rearranging them constantly. I often noticed her talking to someone who was in her room, but I figured she had an imaginary friend that she was playing with, so I never really questioned it, as her older brother had one when he was about 3 years old too. One day she came out of her room crying, so I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "He's calling me names again, silly names, and I don't like it." I was confused, and I asked who was calling her silly names, thinking that it was one of her brothers, and she said, "Champagne, the boy one." I looked at her shocked, because Champagne was what I called my great-grandfather when I was a little kid, but he passed away when I was 3. He was my favorite person in the world. I even told my great-grandmother that if she didn't want him living with her anymore, she could have just sent him to my house, and that she didn't have to send him to live with God. He called me Sarah Barracuda Bug as a child and had silly names for everyone that he met. I called my mom because I had never told any of my children about great-grandpa Champagne, especially my 3-year-old daughter. And my mom said that she had never mentioned him either. I said to my mom that I didn't know what to do, so I asked my daughter if she talked to Champagne often. And she said that he helped her make her bed every day, and she was sick of him calling her silly names. My mom, who was on the phone, asked if he was still there, and my daughter said yes, so I asked her what Champagne's favorite flower was. And my 3-year-old thought for a second and proudly said sweet pea and chrysanthemum. I don't even know what that is. And I just glared in awe, as she was right. And what 3-year-old knows that word? I don't even know that word. She was even able to tell me the names of Champagne's mom and dad. I know my grandpa is watching over us. She talked to him for a while, but around age 5, I stopped hearing about him and often wonder through the years if he's still around. Yes, girl, I'm sure he's still around. Kids just have a way of seeing stuff like that because they're not programmed to think differently yet. Also, the name Champagne is not a commonly used name. There's absolutely no way she would have thought of that on her own. The flowers, no, that was definitely your great-grandpa. Now, this next story freaked me out more than any other listener submission I've had so far, and I've gotten quite a few. And you'll see why when we get to the end of this. This story comes from a listener named Amy. "I'm extremely late sending this email to you. Sorry, we've been struggling with my teenage son, and I just now found the time. You said on TikTok that you wanted all the tea, and I told you that I was abducted and hitchhiked with the happy face killer. Well, here goes nothing. I grew up in foster care after the state of California took me into protective custody at 6 months old due to abuse and neglect. I was moved to the foster care system in Oregon, and they changed my name so that I could not be found. Very long story short, the foster family I was in when I was 12 years old decided to adopt their youngest foster child and wanted to have all of their attention and love for him only. So we all got the boot. I was moved into a group home that seemed cool at first, but that didn't last long. There was a lot of abuse there, and they were taking pictures of the kids there, and one night I jumped out of the window with one of the other kids, and we just walked all night. At 12 years old, we were sleeping under the Ross Island Bridge in downtown Portland and drinking wine to not feel the cold nights. I spent a year begging for food outside of a McDonald's and eating out of garbage cans. You'd be surprised at what people throw away, such as an entire half of a Subway sandwich, Mexican food in takeout boxes, etc., but we were surviving. My birthday was on September 19th, and on my 13th birthday, there was a bad ice and freezing rainstorm. We went into a parking garage to stay dry. We found it less windy in the staircase, so we were walking up to the staircase in between the 3rd and 4th floor, when we saw drops of blood. We were worried that someone may need help, so we followed the blood, which was becoming more than just drops, and we found a dead teenager, but we didn't know that he was dead just yet. This was before cell phones, so we had to run to a payphone and call 911, anonymously of course, because we were runaways and didn't want to go back into the system. I was traumatized by what we had found, and I had nightmares for a long time. Skip forward to the summer of 1993 when I was still 13, and in downtown Portland they have a Rose Festival parade followed by a week of a fair or carnival with rides and foods, and we hung out there every day. The kid I had spent the last year with met a guy and took off the same day I met RJ Lopez, the most gorgeous Mexican with crystal blue eyes, and we hung out all day. That night his mom offered me a ride home, and I told her I was homeless, so they took me in. She bought me clothes, cooked me food, taught me how to cook and how to do laundry. All the stuff I never knew how to do before. RJ's mom had enrolled me in an alternative school that same year. And to get home, we would take the MAX train, which is like a subway. Well, I went to school for about a week, and the first day that I had to come home alone was on a Friday. I wasn't really familiar with the Rockwood area in Gresham, Oregon, but I knew how to get back home. While on the MAX, I noticed two guys staring at me. They looked to be between 18 and 20 years old, and they were making me very uncomfortable, so I got off the MAX on Southeast 182nd Avenue. And I noticed that they'd got off too, so I started walking, but not being familiar with the area, I had no clue where I was going. And the faster I walked, the faster they both walked. I took a left and ran. I about shit myself when I saw that I had just ran into a cul-de-sac where there was nowhere else to go. Right as I turned around, I saw the two guys. The tallest one punched me in the face, and that was the last thing I remember. When I woke up, I realized I was tied up. There were ropes so tightly around my wrists and ankles, and I was completely naked and shivering from the cold. To make another long story short, I spent 2 weeks getting raped, burned with cigarettes, starved of food and water for 24 to 48 hours at a time. I honestly thought I was going to die, and being a ward of the state, no one would really be looking for me, as I'm sure that RJ's mom probably thought that I had ran off again. I had spent days coming up with a plan, and I would only have one chance. The hardest thing I've ever had to do is telling the guy raping me that I was falling in love with him, asking for sex to make what I was saying more believable, and yes, he did start to believe me, but not enough to unchain me yet. So I just kept at it. One morning he was screaming at the other guy for smoking all the cigarettes in one night and about having no money. This was my chance. I asked if he would let me go over to the store and steal cigarettes for him. I said, "How do you know that you can trust me if you don't let me prove myself to you?" And it worked. My wrists and ankles were in so much pain, and sores had formed over the 2.5 weeks that I had been tied up. I walked into the store, and before any words could form, I just passed out. When I came to, the store manager called the police, and I was taken back to foster care. I never reported this incident, as right before I left the store, he whispered in my ear that I better come back and to not tell anyone or he would kill me in the most painful and horrific way known to mankind. I was terrified. And let me just point out that I was a virgin before being abducted. 3 months later, I had been adopted by a great family, and I went in for a well check and found out that I was pregnant. Back then, we did not have a say over our medical decisions like kids do over 15 now, so I was made to get an abortion. A choice I still regret to this day. So after the abduction and the abortion, I was adopted finally by a wonderful couple. However, I was even more angry at the world and lost than I was before. Something had been taken from me when I was abducted, and it took a part of my soul with it. I was already so full of anger from feeling like I did not really belong anywhere or with anyone, and I was just searching for a place where I was really wanted or was even just accepted. And although my adopted parents were great, I just didn't feel like I belonged, so I kept running away. I was arrested several times for being a runaway and taken back to my parents. At 14, I met a 27-year-old man. We were both living on the streets. Me off and on since getting adopted, but he paid attention to me. It felt like I was being seen for the first time ever, and it felt good. I don't think I ever really stopped to think about the age difference until we were arrested. That part's coming. But instead, I was just feeling special and wanted. We hung out almost every day. He introduced me to drugs, gangs, and crime, but I still felt seen, so it still felt good. He introduced me to his friend Crystal, who was 18, and we became the best of friends. This man started calling me his girlfriend. We cuddled at night to stay warm every time that I'd run back to the streets. When I had nightmares, he'd pull me out of them and he kept me safe. Or so I thought. We all decided to go to Clear Lake, California, where Crystal's parents lived, so my boyfriend went and got us a car to drive there. He had about $800 on him. He came back hours later with a piece of junk for a car, but it somehow ran, and he claimed that he got it for $600, leaving us $200 for gas and food, and back then, gas was approximately 99 cents to $2 a gallon, believe it or not, so this seemed like a great plan. As we were driving down the freeway, the car overheated and smoke started going everywhere, and after that, the car just wouldn't drive. We all got out of the car, and my boyfriend grabbed a towel and started wiping down the car, which was super weird to me, so I asked him, "What are you doing?" And the answer I got was, "Well, the car's stolen." I was so angry because he lied to me, and he continued to lie to me. But before I could say a word, the police pulled up and we were all arrested. We were arrested in a small town, and we were taken to the police department. The minute I said, "Where are you taking my boyfriend?" the police realized the age difference and said that they were adding an additional charge for statutory rape. My boyfriend at the time lunged at me, and the police pulled him off of me and took him back to where I'm assuming there were holding cells, and they took Crystal back there as well. I had a puppy with me, and they allowed me and the puppy to sit in the chairs in the office while they questioned me about who I was. Because I was a minor and lied about who I was, they couldn't contact my parents. They took me into a foster home on house arrest. Back then, they did not put an ankle monitor on me, but just said the words that I was on house arrest. I got to keep my puppy with me, which was nice, but the foster parents made me take my shoes off and they locked them in their office at their home so that I could not run away. They treated me for head lice. I don't think I had it, but they had other kids in the home, so they said it was standard protocol. That night when everybody was asleep, I took some dog food and my dog and I left on bare feet, and I met up with Crystal. She was just booked and released and given a court date, and we'd already discussed where we would meet up if something went wrong. I guess she didn't trust my boyfriend as much as I did. This is when we decided to hitchhike to her parents' house in Clear Lake, California, which was the original plan. We were picked up by a man in a truck, and Crystal sat up front and I sat in the back. We stopped and he bought me some shoes and dog toys, and he was only going to drive us to Sacramento, but instead he ended up driving us all the way to Clear Lake to make sure we got there safely. When we got there, he gave us $100 because we had about 10 cents to our name, and he also stopped and bought me some dog food and dog treats. He was very nice, to be honest with you. He bought us food all the way there, bought us coffee every morning, and played our type of music the whole drive. Every gas station that we stopped at, we would pick a vehicle that was dirty, and we would use our finger to draw a smiley face on the back of the dirty window. This was something that he had started, but I thought was funny. Anyways, once I was in Clear Lake, Crystal ditched me, so I contacted my parents who drove down to pick me up. I went to my court date for the stolen vehicle, but the owner of the vehicle never showed up, so all charges were dropped. Fast forward about 10 years down the road, and my parents were watching Dateline, or may have even been 2020. But I saw the story of the happy-faced killer who drew smiley faces on the letters that he sent to the media and the police. And as soon as they showed his picture, I couldn't believe it. I don't know why he didn't kill us, but I've thought a lot about this over the years. Maybe he liked dogs. But according to his daughter, he laughed and killed kittens, so I doubt that. Maybe it was because there was 2 of us instead of 1. I don't know. What I do know is that I'm very fortunate to be alive, because his daughter describes a completely different man than who we rode with in that truck. I never saw anything that would make me fearful, so I just don't know, but obviously people can wear many faces. I'm better now, and I have almost 8 years clean and sober. Plus, I'm very fortunate to have the wonderful parents that I have. I have 2 healthy and happy kids, one's 25 and one is 17. I work at a drug and alcohol treatment program in the administration department, and I'm also finishing school so that I can become a dual diagnosis drug and alcohol counselor. My life has turned out great, but if you'd met me as a child, then you wouldn't recognize who I am now. I do volunteer with search and rescue after what I went through, and I try to use the bad parts of my life to make a difference. Girl, Yes, you are so fortunate to be alive because that is crazy. That is insane. You rode with the smiley face killer for hours and he fed you and bought you shoes and dog food and you didn't die. That's a win, my friend. That is a win. This next story comes from a listener who asked me to come up with a random name for her. So this story is from Monica because, duh, Friends is my favorite show. Okay, so I was dating this guy last year who we'll call Dave. Dave used to be on drugs, so I never would give him the time of day, but eventually he had been clean for a year or so, and everyone was like, he's such a good person, he's not on drugs anymore, kind of suggesting that I should give him a shot. So I did. Now, before this, I had been single for quite some time. Anyway, he moved in pretty fast, and things were going well for the most part. One night, we had gone to the liquor store and gotten a bottle of Jägermeister. We come back to the house, and we're drinking, shooting pool, just having a good time. But the next thing I know, I woke up in bed naked, and slightly confused, I asked Dave if we had had sex, and he said, "You told me that you would remember." And I said, "Okay, but, well, I don't, so why would you even have to ask me that in the first place?" Dave looked at me and says, "You were pretty drunk and now you don't remember and I feel bad like I've taken advantage of you. You were talking dirty and you really had me going too." And I'm just like, oh, well, wait a minute, what? Because I'm not one to talk dirty and especially not the type to be saying some of the things that Dave said that I had been saying. We kind of just ended up letting it go because we both had to go to work, so I got up and got dressed. I go out to my Jeep, and there's cats eating out of a Taco Bell bag in the front passenger seat. Dave had left the windows down, which then prompted me to ask Dave, where the hell did Taco Bell come from? Dave said that we went to Taco Bell last night and then to the park. And I'm just like, what the hell? I don't remember shit from last night, and that's not normal for me. I have never not remembered what happened by just drinking Jaeger. The only time I never remembered what happened is when I drank moonshine with Jaeger. I was kind of playing around and I told him that he must have roofied me, and he immediately denied it and was being really defensive. I told Dave that I was just kidding, but then the more I thought about it, the more I was convinced that he had to have. My kid said that we were gone for quite a long time, and then a few nights later, he wakes up in the middle of the night and he's crying like someone had just died or something. I asked why he was crying and what was wrong, and Dave said that he'd had a dream that I had paid 2 big old dudes to kill him, and that it felt so real. Then he asked me if I'd paid guys to kill him, and he said it like he was so serious. And I was like, what the hell? Are you fucking serious right now? No, I have not paid anyone to kill you. I was pissed, and he just kept going on and on about it, so I said, you must have a guilty conscience about something that you've done to me, so what have you done to me? And he keeps saying that he hasn't done anything, and Dave was telling his brother about this dream the next day. So I told him the same thing again, that he must have a guilty conscience, that maybe he had roofied me that night. I said it in a sort of jokingly manner, but I was actually kind of serious. Anyway, nothing else ever really came about that situation, and we ended up splitting up a little bit after that. But after we broke up, it seemed like people were messing around my house in the middle of the night, and of course my youngest child called Dave to come and check it out for us. 10 minutes later, he says that he's on his way, and he said this as if he was coming from his house and he had his son with him. Funny thing, though, is as soon as she called Dave, everything stopped. Dave and his son came to check things out around our house and found nothing. And I just had this feeling in my gut the whole time. I couldn't sleep, neither could my daughter. Now, at this point, I didn't have my gun, and Dave knew that. But little did he know I had borrowed one, just because something in my gut told me to. So Dave and his son leave, and a little while later, the shit starts back again. So I texted him again. He says that he would be on his way again. It was exactly 10 minutes later that he says he's on his way. And again, as soon as I text him, everything stopped. Again. I texted Dave instead of calling, that way whoever it was wouldn't know that I contacted anyone, so that kind of threw me off. My nerves were freaking shot at this point. I was tired and just needed some sleep. Him and his son check things out again, and again they don't see or find anything, like nothing at all. After checking around the outside again, Dave comes in the part of the house where I'm at, and I had a sledgehammer and a machete in the bed with me and a gun under the pillow. Dave was trying to comfort me and asking if I was okay and telling me to calm down because he could see the anxiousness all in my eyes, telling me that it's okay, that he's not going to let anything happen to me. And then I hear something, and when I do, everything in his face changed. I grabbed the gun from under the pillow and his eyes got so wide. I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah, it must have just been the dogs." And he just kind of nonchalantly hit the wall, like kind of made it seem like he'd hit the wall by accident. I told Dave that one of the kids that I sometimes babysat was there, and he seemed surprised by that. Almost like, "Oh, he's here?" And I said, "Yeah, why are you acting so surprised?" Dave kept going outside, and I just felt this overwhelming fear. So I go in the room with my daughter, and I had the gun in my waistband, and I was kind of telling her what I thought and how weird Dave was acting. She said that she didn't believe that Dave would do something like that, but I swore I knew it was him. It's like he needed a reason for us to call him and get him there into the house. Dave came back in and said, "I'm going to have to stay until about 6. It was about 4:30 at this point. And I asked why he needed to stay until 6 a.m., and Dave said that his mom was probably going to think that he had relapsed because he'd already left her house and came back twice. I told Dave to just tell his mom what was going on, but he didn't. And he kept getting close to me on the side that I had the gun on. Things didn't go as planned, so he ended up leaving. And everyone was telling me that I was being paranoid, like I always have been in these fucked up situations, but I knew I wasn't. None of this was making any sense, and there was no point in trying to convince them otherwise. Things blew over, and we eventually got back together. Why? I have no idea. It's like he had some type of love spell on me or something. And things were okay, and then one day, me, Dave, and the landlord got into it. My landlord lived up the hill on the same property as me, and Dave and his son just kept on and on with the landlord, so my landlord called some of his buddies there to whoop Dave's ass. The guys that showed up ended up being some of his uncles, so the same family. They brought ball bats and such. Anyways, things got heated, but nobody actually fought, and the cops got called. Apparently, I had 4 warrants for my arrest, and so did Dave. I was unaware of these, and Dave said that he was too. The cops said that if they came back, then we were both going to jail. Everyone left, and we got something to eat from Subway, and then we stopped by the liquor store. I asked what Dave wanted because he didn't drink Jaeger, and he said that Jaeger was fine because that's what I liked, so to go ahead and get that. And I was like, "Yeah, but you don't like it, so let's get something that we both like." He said that it was fine and told me that he would just pour his Jaeger into a cup, and I was like, what the hell does that matter? Like, I don't get it. Anyway, Dave gets himself a cup, and we stopped by the local state park to go to the dock. That's where I used to go to clear my head. My son called and asked where we were and told me that the cops were still hot around our place. I told my son and Dave that they were going to meet us there. Now, Dave gets the bottle of liquor out because I didn't want to since we were at a state park and all. He pours some into his own cup and then says that he had to go look for something in the boys' vehicle. I'm thinking he's probably going to look for a jacket, but I wasn't sure. Well, me and my sons are all talking about what had happened earlier, and I realized that Dave should have already found whatever it was that he had went to the vehicle and was looking for. So I walked over and I said, "What are you out here looking for? I mean, there isn't a whole lot of stuff to look through back here." And he said he guessed that it wasn't back there as he backs out of the vehicle. And that's when I noticed that he still had the bottle in his hand, and I really didn't think anything of it. The boys asked me and Dave if we wanted to go to Jeremy's house with them. Jeremy is my son's friend, who I consider one of my boys. And they asked if we wanted to go to Jeremy's house just in case the landlord tried to be an ass again and call the cops on us, and we'd both end up in jail over dumb shit. And I was like, "Okay, yeah, we'll just follow you there." Well, Dave was like, "We need to go back to the house and get your Subway sandwich." I told him no and that it was fine. But Dave was adamant on going back and getting it, and I was like, "Look, I'm grown, I'm a big girl, let's go." So we headed to Jeremy's house instead. And when we get there, there are 2 people standing outside of a truck in the driveway. It ended up being my son's friend's mom and a guy she knew who had just gotten out of jail and was supposed to be a changed man now, blah, blah, blah. My son's friend's mom was drinking moonshine, and I took a few little sips and told them that I didn't want any more because I knew better than to mix the 2 liquors. 2 of the kids were at work and they had to be picked up, We were supposed to be the ones picking them up, but since Dave was drinking too, I asked the boys to go get them. My son asked, "You gonna be good here, Mama?" And I told him, "Yes, son, I'm good." Later on, they told me that they had a feeling come over them before they left, but that they didn't know why. And I know nothing else from that point on. Only what I've been told after the fact from my teenage kids who had pieced everything together, and it only gets worse from here. A series of events happened that I was completely unaware of, and these are things that my children have told me happened. They said that me and Dave showed up at the kids' work. They said that we pulled up and that Dave was telling them that my son's friend's mom was drunk and had done went crazy. He told them that me and this child's mom had actually gotten into a physical fight, which would explain why my eye was swollen shut and black and blue. And then told my son's friend not to go home. I'm not exactly sure everything he told them word for word, but my son's friend was scared to death to even go back around his mother. I guess he told them that we would meet them at the house because they were still waiting for the other two to get off of work. A little later, my son got a phone call from Dave. He says, "Can you help me get your mom out of the bathtub? She was using the bathroom, she slipped and fell into the tub, and I can't get her up by myself. She's dead weight." There is no possible way I could have fell inside my bathtub. You had to step up to get into it. If I would have fell, I would have fell into it and hit my head and ended up on the floor. Anyway, they said when they got there that they went straight to the bathroom and that I was naked laying on a blanket and pillow. My son and his two friends, whom I consider my sons also and refer to them as my boys, saw me naked. They then helped Dave dress me, and the pants that Dave put on me were pants that nobody had seen in a very long time. They were actually my daughter's pants. I guess in the midst of all of this going on, my landlord called the cops and said that we were being too loud. I still have no idea how, why, or what sounds or noises or anything that he was able to hear. So my son had my 9mm Uzi, the only gun that I had left that I didn't have to pawn to pay bills. And apparently when the cops pulled up, I went outside to talk to them. Meanwhile, Dave tells my son that he's going to hide the gun in the attic. For what reason, I don't know, but I guess he made him think that he would get in trouble for having it in his possession. I'm not sure. My son said that when Dave went to put the gun in the attic, that he climbed up there like a spider monkey and that it looked a lot like he had done this before. Anyway, I was outside talking to the officers for a few hours is what I've been told, that or a long-ass time, but I'm not quite sure, and I have no idea what about. I do know that Dave told me to tell the cops that my landlord hit me, and I guess I was so fucked up and out of it that I did. Side note, remember earlier in the story when the cops were called and they said that we each had 4 warrants, and that if they had to come back, that they were going to take us to jail? Yeah, they didn't. I found out later that Dave knew the officer that I was talking to. Okay, so I had talked to this officer that Dave and his family had known for a really long time, and I don't know if my kids left while the cops were there or after the cops left. But the boys did later say that Dave was being extra nice to them. He gave them a vape that he had just bought and other things, and that he was acting that way towards them the whole night. So the boys were gone and had somehow gotten the gun in their possession again, but I don't know how. But it was just me and Dave at the house, and I was starting to come to a little bit more, or at least enough to know that my face was fucked up. I remember being in the bathroom and seeing myself in the mirror, and I said, "What the fuck?" He said, "What, baby?" I said, "What the fuck happened to my eye?" He proceeded to give me this story of how my son's friend's mom had me on the ground. Remember, this is the same story that he'd fed the boys already earlier. I was just so out of it, I don't remember anything besides what I'd been filled in on. Dave said that she pulled me out of the car and had me on the ground and that she was whooping my ass. And I said, "Oh, hell no, there's no bitch that did this to my eye. I can take a fucking lick." I was fuming fucking mad. I didn't know what happened, but I knew what he was saying wasn't the truth. I said, "Okay, so if she was whooping my ass that bad, then why wouldn't you get her off of me? You've always said that no one is going to lay their hands on me as long as I'm with you, and that it doesn't matter if it's a male or female. So what happened to that shit, huh?" He said that he couldn't do anything or some shit, blah, blah, blah. I told him I was leaving, and when I did, he said, "You're not getting the keys to your mom's car." I was so pissed, and at this point knew I was being lied to, and I was still clueless on any of the events that had happened. I said, "Fuck it, I don't need the keys." I just took off walking. I walked to my oldest daughter's house, who just lived around the corner. Her boyfriend is Dave's brother by adoption, but they may as well be blood. I get there, and I remember talking to them about Dave and about how he kept telling me that a girl had did this to my face. They didn't seem to care or even be listening. So I figured I was just probably drunk off my ass and deserved it. I don't remember how I got back home, but they told me that I had told them to tell Dave to come and get me. So I guess that he came and got me in my mom's car, but I don't remember that part. What I do remember is that we were in the house, and I'm still trying to find out what the fuck actually happened. He told me that I just needed to quit asking all these questions, and he had my phone in his hand calling someone. Important fact is that the kids had told me that Dave had told them that I had lost my phone earlier that night. Now Dave magically has the phone. Anyway, I saw that he was calling someone, but I still to this day can't remember what he said to the person that triggered me, but something triggered me. And like I said, I was not myself for a good 12 to 15 hours. So I took the phone out of his hand so fast, I shattered it on the concrete floor, and in the midst of all this happening, he's yelling, "No!" And I said, "It's too fucking late. You're not calling anybody off my goddamn phone to come and fuck me up some more." So I asked him one last time what happened to my eye, and I got the same story. As soon as he opened his mouth and the first word tried to come out, I threw a bottle of hot sauce at him so hard that it actually stuck into the wall. Lucky for him, my judgment was highly impaired. Meanwhile, he keeps trying to calm me down. And I just keep repeating, "What happened to me? What happened to my face? No bitch did this to me." And I was throwing anything in my grasp at him. The wall, the floor, wherever the fuck else I felt like throwing it. Then I told him to give me my mom's car keys. He told me that I wasn't getting them, telling me, "You've already wrecked it and I'm not giving you the keys." And him talking about me was just getting me even more pissed, because how did I wreck the car? Why did I have access to the keys? And why was I even allowed in the driver's seat if I was that drunk? So I was beyond pissed that he wouldn't give me the keys, and I started walking again. He was following me this time, and I was irate because he was right on my ass. This is when I yelled, "God damn it, get the fuck away from me before I actually hurt you." And he just kept giving me the same old, "I don't know why you're so pissed at me. I didn't do anything. Baby, please. Baby, stop." Well, about this time, my kids come down the same road that I was walking on, and they all jump out. My son asked Dave directly, "You put your hands on my mom, Dave, huh?" Dave said, "No, I haven't touched her, I swear." This is when my son grabs the gun out of the trunk, and I guess God was protecting him because for whatever reason that we still don't know, his friend and one of the boys that I claim as my other son had taken the one and only bullet out of that gun earlier. Needless to say, things were getting heated. He gave my son the keys, and I made them all get back into their truck. I don't know where we went first, but I know that it wasn't home. I don't remember. Dave proceeded to walk to my oldest daughter's house. Her boyfriend was his adopted brother, but might as well be blood again. He was crying and saying things like, I lost her for real this time," and acting like the victim. But whatever he'd said to them, they obviously believed it. One of my other children called her to tell my oldest daughter what had happened, and her response was, "Come on, you know how mom gets when she's drunk. Like, what the fuck is that even supposed to mean?" She's going by a situation that occurred with me and her. I had been drinking, but that wasn't the root cause of that situation. But that was the way she was acting. Everyone's seen it but her. Her boyfriend has pretty much tried his damnedest to keep her away from me when I kicked him out of my house in 2021. Or it may have been 2020. That's another story, but when I kicked him out, she left too, which was kind of expected. Needless to say, the kids couldn't believe how my oldest daughter was acting and siding with Dave. Anyway, we go back to the house and we get some things, and there's no way that I could stay there after that. The kids were all looking around, and I go into the bathroom to use the restroom. This is when I was like, what the fuck? My butthole hurts so bad. Then I noticed the bruises on my legs. This is about the time that I put everything together about what had actually happened and realized that I was raped anally. The house was completely destroyed. I hollered for the kids and told them what I'd just realized, and of course, everyone was irate pissed, and we're all just like, holy shit, this motherfucker's done this before. This is not his first rodeo. And that would explain why I was given a bath and then put into different clothes. Anyway, we go to my son's friend's house where it initially happened. That poor boy's bedroom was absolutely destroyed. And looking around, you could tell and see where I had been thrown up against different things. Everything he owned was broken. There was a machete laying in the floor by the bed, just crazy, crazy shit. I went to the bathroom there and took pictures of what I could of all the bruising. I had over 30 bruises. The inside of my fingers were bruised and my wrist looked like it had been restrained. It was awful. We couldn't even stand to go in that part of the house, and I just felt uncomfortable everywhere. We go in the living room and I find my bottle of Jaeger. and it's still over half full, so there's absolutely no way that I got that messed up. I, to this day, have no memory of what happened. The boys stayed up all night so that I could try to get some sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. And there were 2 other people there also that night when everything happened. So we don't know if they were all 3 involved or what, but it sounds like it. Needless to say, none of us could sleep. I ended up going to the hospital a whole county over for mine because I didn't care for the health care in my county. So I get there and they ask if I wanted a rape kit done, and I said, yeah, I guess. They asked me so many questions that I did not have answers to. And one of the nurses doing the rape kit ended up being my kid's cousin on their dad's side, so that was even more embarrassing. I was there for hours as they pulled hairs, took pictures, swabs, etc. He'd cleaned me up so good that there was really nothing else to go off of, but I had the kit done anyways. They asked me if I wanted counseling, and at the time I didn't, because I was tired of reliving it over and over already and not knowing shit about what happened, if that even makes sense. 2 of the kids that were in the room for the most part, while we were waiting on the officers to show up from the county it happened in, they had went outside for a minute. They said that they were coming right back in. The officer gets there and is already mad because he had to come out that far to a different county. He asked why I came here, and I told him that I didn't like the health care in our county. He was also asking me questions that I couldn't answer, and I told him that my kids were supposed to be coming right back in because the kids knew more about what had happened than I did. I didn't remember a lot from that night. The officer asked me for phone numbers, which I couldn't give him because my phone was busted. The officer eventually looked at me and said, well, you just don't know anything, do you? I told him I didn't need his smartass remarks. He left a card with me with the name of the investigator to get a hold of when I could. The officer left, and I find out later that someone wouldn't let my kids back into the room while the officer was in there asking me questions that I couldn't answer. Like, what the fuck? So I get discharged, and they let me go back out. We go to the pharmacy and wait on meds. Oh, and before I forget, I kept asking the doctors and nurses to run a drug test on me or to do a toxicology level test report or whatever else they thought they may need. They only tested me for heroin, crack, meth, and cocaine, and then said that that was the extent of the testing that they could do there. Everything came back negative. What they did say was that my eye bone on the top and the bottom were both fractured. I was told that it should heal fine. It didn't. That's a scar that I'll carry with me forever. My other daughter and her boyfriend met us at the pharmacy and gave us money to eat on, and my oldest daughter called while we were there to ask what the doctor had said. I couldn't help but to say that I was lying and I was just drunk, probably sarcastically, because I was still hurt by the way she had acted, and we didn't talk for months. So after the pharmacy, we went back to my house and I had an eviction notice on my door. I went to talk to my landlord, and he said that he was sorry about what had happened to me and that he knew Dave was crazy, and he'd even said at one point that he'd kind of always wondered why I was even with him. Like, what the fuck, you couldn't warn me? Apparently, everyone knew about Dave but me. My landlord then told me that he didn't sign up for all this. Like, I'm sorry, did I? And then he tells me, honey, if you need to take a shower, you can take one here. Like, why would I even do that? Anyway, I told him I would be back to get my stuff as soon as I could. And we came back a few days later to get a load of my things. We had taken 2 different vehicles. I was driving one and the boys were driving the other because when we got the first load of stuff from there and they left, the boys had somewhere else to be. So the boys were still at the house when I left and I saw Dave on the road. He turned around and proceeded to chase me. I called the boys as I kicked it to the floor. Once I made it to the main highway, Dave and the guy that he had with him had turned around. By the time the boys were already about to Dave's mom's driveway, Dave and the other guy that were with him had already pulled in and parked like they weren't doing anything. There were words and such, but Dave's mom called the cops, so of course, Dave and his buddy booked it out of there. We went back to get some of my stuff a few days later, and we were chased again. Mind you, we live in what you would call, quote-unquote, their territory, a place called the Hills. So every time we went to get stuff, everyone would inform Dave that we were there, or we would end up running into him somewhere. That day, I told the boys, just come out, we'll try another day. I went to the investigator's office and told her about it so it would be stated and on record. Everyone was asking me, like, why didn't you call the cops? Well, because the cops weren't on our side. That's exactly why I never called the cops. So we go back a few days later to get my things because the landlord had given me a 3-day extension period, and that was the limited time I had to get my things out. That day, Dave must have been informed again that we were there because we made it to the house. Then he proceeded to ride back and forth up the road. And of course, the boys were walking up to the hill, to the top of the road, trying to get him to stop, and I was telling them to come on and to just not worry about it, let's just get our stuff out. The landlord called the cops and mentioned my name. Like, what the fuck, why would you even do that? Especially when you're the one that called the police and you'd already told me that you thought Dave was crazy. So the police get there and I walked up there to where the officer was to see if he could maybe stay for like 10 minutes or so just so I could finish getting my stuff. Dave passes by the road again as the police were turning into the driveway, and the boys and I were like, there he is, that's him, right there, go get him. The police officer played stupid, like, I'm here to see why you called. He told us and the landlord that he couldn't leave the scene that he was called to until another officer arrived. But he never actually called it in, so he was just acting shady as hell. The kids asked the landlord about the washer, and he said, no, that's my washer, remember? I asked if he would mind keeping the dryer instead. The landlord said, no, that's my washer, and I was like, okay. Anyway, I asked the officer if it was okay for me to get what I could while I was there. The officer ran my license and said that everything was good and that he was just going to write it up as a report since the landlord was the one that called. This cop had been here previously, so he knew the situation already. So we proceeded down the hill to get what we could. The landlord and that officer were talking, and the landlord was standing at Dave's truck door. When it opened, the cop was sitting in the seat inside. So I'm in the house getting stuff together, and the kids are like, Mama, here come 4 cops down the hill, so I'm thinking like, what the hell? I walk out, and the officer says, you remember that I told you if we were called back out here that you were going to jail because you have warrants and you still haven't gotten them taken care of like I told you. They were just being real dicks. I explained that I haven't really had time to worry about the warrants because I've been trying to get my stuff out of the house and I ended up losing my job because of all of this. But they weren't hearing anything that I had to say. This was the first time I've ever been in jail, and I'm in my late 30s. So they let Dave slide and took me to jail instead. I was not resisting arrest, and they proceeded to push me up the hill. 4 grown men pushing me up a hill after I had been through everything I had been through already. They put me in one car, and then they came back to get me out and put me in a different car. My son was irate. One officer was irate back, and all I could say was, I'm okay, son, I'm okay. They asked me how old my son was, and I told them. Then I tried to explain that he was just confused and worried about his mom. We're going down the road, and my son ends up on the phone with one of the officers asking him why they didn't take Dave to jail too. The officer told my son that he needed to let them do their job. Well, one of the officers tells the other officer through the radio, and I hear them say this, that maybe they need to pay him, meaning my son, a little visit. After hearing this, I told them, y'all need to leave my son alone. And then I said a prayer. I get to the jailhouse, and I'm waiting to be booked or whatever you call it. I noticed a trustee mean-mugging me every time he walked by. And in my head, I'm just thinking, like, no, don't make eye contact. And then I'm like, no, fuck that, I can't act like a pussy in jail. So I stared back every time. Mind you, my eye is still fucked at this point. Anyway, the officer that took me in asked me what had happened to my eye, like he didn't already know exactly what had happened. I told him that Dave had done it, and he just shook his head. I'm already thinking, yeah, this doesn't seem like it's going to end well for me. They put me in a holding cell with other women. They didn't give me any shoes, just socks, and I was in there for 8 hours. They wouldn't book me for me to be able to use my phone call. So, thankfully, a girl that was in there that was just waiting to be transferred was nice enough to let me use her number to call a bail bondsman, because that was the only thing I could think to do that didn't cost money. And just as luck would have it, it turns out that me and my children were calling the same bail bondsman at the same time. The only person's number I knew is the number that I gave to the bondsman, and they got a hold of him. They tried to bail me out once and then said that I had already went to court, which never happened. The girl that let me use her phone number kept saying that she wanted a cigarette and was asking the trustee for one. Then told the other girl that she wanted some powder for some cigarettes. And then told me that she never acts like this. The trustee is still mean-mugging me every time he walks by. So she gets something from the other girl and slips it under the door, and I'm minding my business on the other side of the room. Needless to say, it's like she was trying to set me up. I heard one of the officers behind the desk say, I swear to God, if this phone rings one more damn time. I knew right then that it was all 4 of my kids calling. My mom and the dude that was going to bail me out calling back to back to back, and that didn't help. The shift changed, and the lady officer comes up and pulls all of us out of the holding cell to put us in another room. calling one by one into the shower, I'm assuming to get searched. She asked who was leaving with the bail bondsman, and I told her that I was. I asked if she needed me right then, and she said no, to just sit and hold tight. I finally did get bonded out. God was on my side, I reckon. So later on, after I was bonded out, I followed up with the investigator. She calls me and says, I need you to do me a favor. I said, okay, and asked what she needed. She told me that I needed to get my records from the hospital I had gone to because if she had to do it, she would have to go through the district attorney's office or some shit like that. And that if she had to do it through the district attorney's office, that it would probably take a couple of months. I thought this sounded weird, but I had never been through anything like this, so I did as she asked. I went to the hospital, and it was absolute hell trying to get my records. When I got them, I asked about the pictures that were taken from the rape kit. And oh, they couldn't find them. Go fucking figure, huh? So I took what I did have to the investigator's office. She called me back the next day and says that the hospital had called her to tell her that they'd found the pictures and to tell me to come and pick them up. That's funny because I'd never told the hospital why I needed them, and nor did I sign any kind of release forms. But I just left the shit alone after that because that told me that they were covering something up. I never got any justice whatsoever and never will. This world is so fucked up. Anyway, girl, that's the conclusion. And apparently the investigator had issued a warrant for Dave's DNA. Apparently the police had been looking for him for a few days. And when they ended up finding him, they didn't even arrest him. Instead, they let him volunteer to come in a few days later. Like, what part of that makes sense? And I found out later that Dave has been accused of rape previously, but he beat the case. Like, damn, girl, that was wild. That was a wild one. And on that note, y'all, let's do it again. Same time, same place, next month. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.